Welcome back to another episode of Gretti's Garage. Ran into a bit of a problem with the Jeep trying to do some maintenance, replace the springs and the pins on my LockRight locker on the front Dana 30, and ended up causing a problem. So now I must fix it. And so you get to come along, and the good thing is I'm going to show you how to install a lunchbox locker, specifically a Spartan Locker, in a Dana 30 if that's something you want to do, or if you just want to hang out and watch me work. But come on in. We'll be glad to have you. So what you're looking at here is problem number one. You can see the pinholes are wallowed out. The pins actually broke in. I think that was an installation error on yours truly. When I put the springs in the other half, I don't think I got one of them in all the way, and so it caused the spring to pop out, and that caused the pin to slide out or not come or do something properly. One of the pins snapped, so when I couldn't turn because both wheels were locked, and I was like, oh, that's not right. So pulled her out. This is now gone to the receptacle which it belongs after 20 some odd years of good service. That's a Power Tracks locker, and it's the front end locker, so it goes in the Dana 30. So we've got something new in store for the Dana 30, and we'll be putting that in. So what we are going to replace that with is a Spartan locker. They say it's easier to install. Not that the LockRight locker is all that hard to install. If this is easier, it's going to be an absolute breeze. So we're going to put that in the front so we can be locked up front and rear. I've got the forward limited slip in the back and the Ford 8.8. So we should be pulling all four wheels during the trail ride. And that's what I like. That way we're not too hard on the equipment.
All right, first thing you got to do is get the front end of the Jeep up on jack stands. Once you do that, grab your tool of choice to get off that front differential cover. Because I can guarantee you, if you don't take off the front differential cover, you're never going to get the locker in. So get to work. Pro tip, gentlemen, leave that middle top bolt in, and then the diff cover won't fall off when you pop it open like that. All right, so next I'm going to take off the calipers. So just take out those two bolts that are holding them on there in the front of that Dana 30 or whatever's holding your calipers on your Jeep, and get that sucker off, because we got to take these rotors off so we can get the axle shafts out. All right, so next we're going to use a 12-point, either a 13 millimeter or a 1/2 inch socket, whichever you've got. Both will work. I usually use a 13 millimeter, but I think a 1/2 inch is a little tighter on the bolt head, but I don't know, I've been using the 13 forever. So get those 3 bolts out that are holding your unit bearing on and be ready to pull out the axle shaft. Now, as you may have noticed, my axle shaft slid out fairly easily, just a couple taps there. Sometimes I can just pull it out by hand, but I've taken mine apart so many times that it's not rusted together. Plus, I'm in Louisiana where we don't have much rust. Now, there are some tricks on how you can get that unit bearing to come out of that knuckle using power steering and putting a bolt behind there somehow. I don't remember. I've never needed it, So I'm not really sure how to do that, but I'm sure you can find some tips or tricks on how to get that unit bearing to separate from your knuckle if you need to. Regardless, you got to get her out of there because we got to get that axle shaft out. So good luck. Hope you get her apart. Now, I have been out on the trail. I've had trouble breaking these bolts free that are on the back of the unit bearing. I just stuck my socket wrench on there with my 12-point socket and just took a hammer and just whacked it from the top just to get it to go free. So if you have a hammer and you got a ratchet, you can get that bolt out. Also, when you put it back together, you can throw a little anti-seize in there as well. So it'll make it a little easier for you to take it apart later if you break an axle shaft or something. And there it is, the mighty Dana 30. Now, I'm going to have to take the carrier out because I have 488 gears. And if you have a 456s or above the carrier brake, you've got to pull the whole center chunk out so that you can get the innards out of the carrier because your cross shaft won't get past the ring gear because it's too thick, it's too wide. If it's 410s, you can actually leave it in there. You have to slide your axle shafts out, but you can take all the innards out without actually taking the whole carrier out of the differential. Now, my bearing caps were marked with the differential, but if yours are not, then you'll need some way to mark them. You got to put them back on exactly like you found them because they're machined with the housing. So keep that in mind. Now, for me to get the carrier out, I usually just put a pry bar behind one of the ring gear bolts and just something that just kind of protects the housing there so I don't scar it up too bad. And then I just pop it out. You can also get a towel and rotate it in there, and then as you rotate it in, that towel will actually bunch up behind it and force the carrier out. I've done that before and I had trouble getting it out. Works pretty good. But I just grabbed my pry bar here and got behind one of the bolts and got her out. Pay attention to those races as well. You want to keep those going back to the proper side. Now, to get the cross shaft retainer pin out, I just use a hex key and pound on it with a big old mallet. You can use a screwdriver that fits. You don't want something too pointy of an end because it'll actually cause that retainer pin to start to mushroom out, and we'll actually get it in there harder, or it'll make it stay in. It will expand and not leave the hole. So I just use a hex key. So what I've realized here is I forgot to mark the ring gear onto the carrier, and that's important because when you put the ring gear on the carrier, you check it for run out. Make sure, like if you're looking from the top of your bicycle wheel, you know, it wobbles back and forth. You want as little wobble as possible. It's got to be within a certain spec. So you want that ring gear to go back on the same spot so you know that you are still meeting that spec for run out. If you rotate it, and you may rotate it in a bad position where you have too much run out, so you don't want to do that. So go ahead and mark it. I put one mark on one side, 2 marks on the other side, and then that way I can slap it back together the way it was. Now usually that differential gear cross shaft will just slide right on out super easy, but I had some wear on mine, so it was actually having a little bit of trouble coming out, which was a little bit surprising to me, so had to work a little bit at it to get it out. But if this happens to you inside the vehicle, usually you can grab a pair of pliers, something like that, get on it. It'll come out, I promise you. So as you pull these differential gears out, aka spider gears, make sure the washers are coming out with them. So you see that washer right there that goes with what I call the spider gear. That goes with that smaller gear. And then on your side gears, you will have another flat washer that goes with it. And they'll stick to the carrier sometimes, but on this locker install, you have to be certain that that washer comes out with the side gear. And there it is. And what I do is I toss mine in a Ziploc bag, throw them back in the Spartan box or LockRight box or whatever, and then I bring it with me on the trail ride in case something goes catastrophically wrong. Now just doing a little bit of cleanup to make sure I didn't get any grit on the carrier where the ring gear goes. That way when I put the ring gear back on, it'll fit nice and snug. And this locker came with a couple goodies. Look at that, Yukon stickers, oh my, and a Quick Performance t-shirt. How about that? Sweet. Alright, so make sure this inner gear is situated correctly with the washer there. So you want the flat side towards the cross pin, you want the cup side towards the axle shaft. Why they didn't put it in the package like that, I'm not really sure, but made me think. Yep, no idea why they did that way. So this locker also came with a hardened cross shaft, which was nice because you didn't have to shop for it separately. Make sure you get the right part and all that. So did appreciate that bit of thought or attention to detail. It's very nice when you don't have to go hunting for parts or part numbers to make sure you get a correct part to go with your locker install. All right, so this locker comes with a pin and a spring, and that's what helps your locker engage and disengage. And then it comes with a retainer wire, I'll call it. So you put the spring in the pin, you put the pin with the spring in it in the hole, you push it down, and there's a little slot on the top of the pin, and you slide the wire in there. It's gonna hold that pin down. Now, I was really nervous about this because if it just barely holds it on and it lets go, it's gonna shoot that pin across the garage. And that won't be fun to find. So be super careful. Make sure that that retainer wire is pushed in there all the way because you don't want that pin launching out across your garage. It's just kind of small. I bet it would be pretty hard to find. So it goes in pretty easy. It's not too bad. Those retainer wires are really stiff, so it's not like they're going to bend or anything like that. So I just call them retainer wires, so I'm not using the word pin too much. I don't really know what else to call them. Maybe if I'd read the instructions. I don't know. I mean, do y'all read instructions? Sometimes I have to admit, I don't read the instructions. This could be a flaw. Could be. Now, what I'm telling you here is these side gears, you do not use a washer with them. So you have to make sure the washer isn't stuck in your carrier, and don't put them onto the side gears if you did pull the washers out, because that would be wrong. You won't have enough gap between the gears and it won't ratchet correctly. And you'll end up with a spool in the front end, which is great if you want a spool in the front end, but most people don't. They want the front end to be able to ratchet so that you can turn. So nope, no thrust washers on the side gears. Now here I had to snip off the retaining wires for them to fit into the carrier so I could get them rotated in the position that I want. I left about, I would say, between 1/4 and 1/2 inch. You'll be able to see how much you need to cut off. You want to be able to rotate them. You'll still be able to pull them out. So don't be too concerned with having them too short. You definitely need enough wire to be able to pull it out with a pair of needle nose or a pair of wire snips. So leave enough, but cut off enough that you can rotate it all the way through the carrier. So you're going to want to be able to line up that center pin shaft hole so that when you release the pins, the springs will pop into the correct position. So it's a little bit crooked there. I probably should have straightened up a little bit before pulling the wire, but it ends up okay for me. As you can see right here, I'm about to pull that wire out. I got it out. I'm just going to slide it over and bing, you hear that? The spring popped that pin into place. So now I'm going to get that side, and there you go. That spring pushed that pin into place. And we're going to go ahead and get these last two out. I'm just using just a little set of wire cutters there to pull those pins out. Actually grips it pretty nicely and pulls it out pretty well. And there it is. All 4 pins are in place. Now I can rotate that assembly, that locker assembly around, be able to slide my cross shaft through and put the retainer pin in for the cross shaft. Right here, I'm just using a flathead screwdriver to separate those cups. They had slid over and were touching in the middle, so I just need to slide them back out so I could be able to put the cross shaft through there. And when you do slide the cross shaft through there, make sure you put the hole on the correct end, unlike me who put the cross shaft through there. And I was like, wait a minute, where's the hole? And I realized it was on the other side because, not paying attention. So make sure the hole lines up with the hole so you can put the pin through. Pro tip. Now it's always fun getting this press fit pin into this hole, and I use whatever method is necessary to get it in. Whatever I have lying around that I can beat on that pin with, I'll use. Right now I'm using a brass punch. It seems to grip it well, so that's why I'm using that to get it started. Then I'll just use a hammer or whatever I have to smash it down in there. I'm sure hammering on it like this is just doing wonders for my bearings. As you can tell, I'm really concerned about that. Actually, I need to replace this carrier and the bearings, so I'll be doing that later anyway, so I guess it's not the end of the world. But if you were doing it, you could probably put this on a side, maybe in a vise, so you're not beating on your bearings as you're getting that pin hammered in there. So there it is, all the way in. That's good to go. All right, so line up your marks and get the ring gear on. If you have trouble getting it on, there are 3 methods I would use. A, beat it on with a dead blow, beat it on with a rubber mallet, or put the ring gear in the oven at like, say 200 degrees for 20 minutes. And it should slide right on there. Ah, the old adage, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. Use that red Loctite on those ring gear bolts. You do not want those backing out and chattering around inside your differential. It's bad. I'm telling you, it's no good. You don't want it. Red Loctite for the win. Now, when putting the bolts in, I have had an issue where it wasn't just quite lined up, so I've just used like a punch or something like that to slide in the hole and just pry just ever so slightly to get it to slide over a little bit and make sure those ring gear bolts are able to go in. Don't get crazy in there. You don't want to mess up the threads inside that ring gear, but it's not going to kill it to just get it to rotate a little bit on the carrier. Right here, I've got the old Makita impact set to Ooga level 1, making sure I don't hit on these ring gear bolts too hard, get them over torqued. Just going in a crisscross pattern, just using the impact to save a little bit of time. I could have used the electric ratchet, but this was already sitting right here and had the right socket on here. So if you're going to use your impact, just be careful. You just don't want to get carried away with it. You're going to hit it with the torque wrench in just a minute anyway. Went ahead and looked up the specs here, got them on video for you. For the Dana 30, ring gear bolts, 55 foot-pounds, and the cap bolts, the bearing cap bolts, are going to be 60 foot-pounds. Can you tell that it's humid outside at all? You can't even see it or anything like that. Gotta love Louisiana. Just getting a little gear lube on everything before I put it all together. That way it's not, running dry or anything like that. I don't know if you have to or not. Just makes me feel better. Do your best to juggle the races on top of the bearings as you try and slide the whole carrier into the differential. It can be a pain in the butt at times, but it'll eventually go in. Just take your time, get it done, and then, kind of feel it and look around, make sure that it's seated all the way in there. I usually whack on it quite a bit with the dead blow or piece of wood or the back end of like the wooden end of a hammer or something like that to make sure it's all seated in there nice and tight before I put the bearing caps back on. What I'm looking for is any gap between the race and where it seats into the differential. If you see any gap there, that race isn't all the way in there. Plus the tone of the hit with the dead blow will change when it's in there all the way. It'll kind of go from more of a ting to more of a thud. That's hard to explain, but I think you'll notice it when you do it yourself. Also, you should notice if you do tap that ring gear up and down just really lightly, you'll feel that backlash. It should be fairly small. You shouldn't be able to move that ring gear up and down very much and feel that gap in there on that backlash, where it's hitting the pinion. So, kind of feel that as well. Make sure it doesn't feel like it's some huge gap there. If it did, probably not seated in all the way. Then we're just going to torque it down to 60 foot-pounds on those bearing caps. And then it'll be time to slide the shafts back in and start to test to make sure this locker is working like it should. All right, so just reverse of everything we did earlier. Now we're going to slide the shaft back in. You may have to, support it so it goes through your inner axle seal, especially on the other side, not so much this side. So it slides through there without messing it up, as well as sometimes you have to rotate a little bit so it can get into the side gears. You have to make sure the splines mesh up. But also take note of your dust cover. Make sure it's lined up appropriately with the front part of your knuckle there. And then get the bolt holes lined up with the unit bearing. It can be a pain at times, but again, take your time. Look in there, use some light flashlights, try and make sure those holes are all lined up before you start working those unit bearing bolts back in. After you get your unit bearing bolts back in, then put your rotor back on, and then it'll be time to slap the caliper on. And then, of course, after the caliper comes the tire. And then after the tire, we got to go to the other side and repeat the process. I had dropped my drag link because it was in the way, and you'll probably want to do the same. It's just one nut, the castle nut. So don't forget to put that back up there, torque it back to spec, put the retainer pin back in. How about those 90s centerline aluminum wheels? Oh yeah. All right, now I'm just gonna check to make sure that it's ratcheting properly by getting it rolling forward and then switching directions. Make sure it lets go and it ratchets and everything's moving freely. No binding, no banging, no pops. And I'll tell you what, seems to be doing really well. 2 thumbs up. All right, it is now time to fill up the differential with some gear oil. I know what you're thinking. Grady, you didn't use any RTV. You didn't put a new gasket on. I've always had a ton of luck just reusing the paper gaskets. If they don't tear when I take them off, I just reuse them, and I don't have any problems with them leaking. So worth a try if you want to. A little childish humor there for you. Anyway, yeah, try reusing the gasket. Like I said, I've always had good luck with it. Also, if you just cut one, like if you have multiple bottles of gear oil you're going to use, which you usually do, if you just cut one cap and leave the other one uncut, then you can just use that cut cap and transfer it between your other bottles of gear oil that you're squirting into the differential or wherever you may be doing it. And then when you're done, if you have a half-empty bottle of gear oil left, you can just use that uncut cap that you did not cut, and that'll help you keep from spilling it, because those little snap-on caps, they just don't work very good. So you can see right here, I've got one that's cut, one that's not cut. I'll be using the not cut one on the half-full bottle of gear oil. Now I'm just working the tires, working the locker, making sure that that gear oil gets kind of worked its way in between there before I take off down the road. As far as filling the diff, you just fill it till it flows out the fill hole, and that's full. And you can just put the plug back in and ready to rock and roll. That's all there is to it. Not much. It looks daunting, but honestly, it's really not that difficult. It's just a lot of bolts. Taking off a lot of bolts, putting on a lot of bolts. Otherwise, I think you can get it knocked out. Good luck to you.
Well, appreciate y'all hanging out with me while I did that locker install. If you've never installed a locker, hope that helped you out. If you've been afraid to tear into the front end of your Jeep Wrangler, it's not all that bad. Get in there and get it done. You can do it. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like and or subscribe. Come back and check out some more. For myself, Go Grady. Y'all have a great evening.